Item, SCP-026. Object Class, Euclid. Special Containment Procedures, SCP-026 is to remain securely locked and boarded up at all times when there is no research ongoing. Alarms are set to alert the Foundation in case of entry by civilians or other agencies. Description: SCP-026 is a 3-story public school building built in data expunged. It has two wings connected to a central foyer. It was declared condemned in data expunge after it was found the floor plan didn't match up to the building's blueprints. See Interview Log 02601. It came to the Foundation's attention after several disappearances in the area were linked to visits to the abandoned building. The building demonstrates spatial anomalies. The internal space is much greater than the external of the building would allow. Hallways display variable length, while stairways have differing number of steps going up or down. The number of rooms of the hallways changes each time they are counted. Attempts at trying to reach the far ends of the hallways have met with failure so far. Entrance located at fire escapes located at the end of the hallways lead to doors approximately midway down the length of the halls. Edit, see Note 026A. There is considerable graffiti on the interior walls of the school. Most appears typical, including gang signs, names, and street art. However, the graffiti fades and reappears, changing location. Writing on chalkboards and bulletin boards changes in a similar fashion. Subjects typically found range from standard school subjects, mathematics, literature, biology, to more esoteric subjects, such as quantum entanglement, data expunged, and eugenics. One researcher reported one board detailing information about SCP data expunged, but photographic evidence showed only a blank slate. See Note 026B. The phrase "the children used to sing" has appeared multiple times in various places throughout the building, but there is currently no explanation for its significance. A number of unconscious subjects have been found in the building, mostly of high school age, ranging from 12 to 18. They are dressed in accordance to the school's dress code, circa data expunged. Several have been identified as former students or faculty of the school who disappeared after the school shut down, in at least one case, more than 10 years after the closure. It is currently unknown how they were transported back into SCP-026. See Note 026C. All attempts to wake the subjects while inside the building have failed. On being removed from the grounds of SCP-026, the subjects wake abruptly. They experience a period of confusion, before dying from extremely rapid dehydration, followed by advanced decomposition. No useful intelligence has been recovered from the subjects to date. The inability to wake subjects extends to those who fall asleep on the grounds of SCP-026. Though the rapid dehydration only seems to affect those who have been found on the grounds of the school. See Incident Report 02612. Note 026A. Robotic exploration and video feeds have shown that the apparent spatial anomalies are caused by changes in the perceptions of observers, rather than actual spatial phenomena. For this reason, SCP-026 does not require the expertise of Mobile Task Force Row 8 roadside picnickers at this time. Update: further exploration has shown that some spatial phenomena do occur. See the exploration logs for more details. Note 026B, the contents of notepads, books, and pieces of paper have been observed to disappear, only to reappear on surfaces within SCP-026. New writings have appeared, mostly drawn from graffiti or textbooks. Caution should be exercised in bringing documents onto the grounds of SCP-026. Note 026C, Several Class D personnel exposed to SCP-026 have disappeared from Foundation control, only to reappear inside the anomalous building. The subjects in question had previously complained of dreams identical to those experienced by Agent Malek. Update: see Interview Log 02608. Incident Report 02612. During a routine security check of SCP-026, Agent Malek was found unconscious by his partner, Agent Jones, in the main foyer. Initial attempts at rousing Agent Malek were ineffective, so he was moved for transportation to Site D to expunged. Upon leaving the grounds of SCP-026, he woke abruptly in a state of agitation. When questioned, he revealed that he had been dreaming of a classroom setting. This dream has been consistent throughout all subjects who have fallen asleep within the grounds of SCP-026.
Item, SCP-039, Proboscis Engineers. Object Class, Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. All instances of SCP-039 are to be contained in Site-77's Wilderness Observation Chamber 2B. At least 2 security personnel are to monitor the interior and exterior of SCP-039's chamber, and are to rotate every 6 hours. Staff members may not access SCP-039's chamber without an accompanying escort from site security, and may only do so for research purposes, or for the examination of the chamber for containment, sabotage or contraband, which is to occur weekly. As of the 18th of September 2020, SCP-039-8 has become pregnant. Responsibility for its containment has been reassigned to personnel in the Veterinary Observation Wing. Description: SCP-039 consists of 23 instances of Nasalis larvatus, or proboscis monkey, who have been subject to radical anatomical changes. The eyes and mouths of SCP-039 are absent, leaving the face bare save for the nose and its accompanying nasal passages. Instances of SCP-039 possess acute auditory and tactile sense to compensate for a lack of eyes, relying mostly on physical contact with objects to perceive them, and on loud nasal snorts as a sort of echolocation to help them navigate in their environment. Necropsies have also revealed the digestive system to be absent. How instances of SCP-039 obtain nutrition, or, alternately, how they survive without it, is still a subject of research. Instances of SCP-039 display signs of sapience, examples of which include communication via nasal snorts, an understanding of spoken English, and a complex understanding of machinery. Adult instances have demonstrated the ability to operate mechanical tools, and possess the ability to repair and manufacture various pieces of technology, such as disassembling and reassembling an internal combustion engine, and efficiently wiring a small apartment room. Testing has shown that SCP-039 appear to work more efficiently individually, rather than in groups, as instances of SCP-039 will often become distracted by one another. Occasionally when working, instances of SCP-039 will clutch their abdomens and emit distressed vocalizations. If food is located nearby, they will attempt to smear their faces with the substance. It is currently hypothesized that this indicates that SCP-039 is the result of artificial manipulation of normal Nasalis larvatus specimens, with documents recovered during containment supporting this hypothesis. See Addendum SCP-039-A. SCP-039 are capable of reproduction and gestation not unlike Nasalis larvatus. As of the time of this writing, 5 instances of SCP-039 have been born. SCP-039 show a very close bond among their species, with newborns often being cared for by all capable adults. New instances are born with anatomical anomalies similar to other instances of SCP-039, but lack the knowledge of other instances. Parent instances will educate newborns on communication and basic skills until they reach the age of 6 months, at which point technological ability will be taught by other adult instances. SCP-039 were recovered from an uninhabited research facility 50 kilometers from the nearby town of Common, Nevada. Documents recovered during containment placed ownership of the facility under a company funding research for the advancement of natural human ability. 20 instances of SCP-039 had been apparently living in and maintaining the facility for an unknown period of time. Additional recovered documents indicate that a project was being conducted to augment human intelligence. This project appears to have been cancelled shortly before the company's collapse, with the assets sold to an unnamed group. Further research into the groups that acquired its assets has revealed several other anomalous objects, including SCP-1513. Addendum SCP-039A. One additional instance of SCP-039 was discovered during containment operations of SCP-1328. Agents are currently following up on any reports indicating the existence of further instances outside of containment. Addendum SCP-039-B. Several documents recovered during initial containment appear to notate the early prototyping stage of SCP-039's development. Research has begun to develop a way to recreate the process that creates new SCP-039 instances. However, the damage the notes had accumulated prior to containment has rendered many of them unreadable.
Item, SCP-031. Object Class, Safe. Special Containment Procedures, SCP-031 is to be contained in a standard containment chamber, located in Site-77's Safe SCP Wing. Personnel interacting with SCP-031 are not to view it directly, and communicate with test subjects through an intercom system installed in each chamber. The containment chamber is to be cleaned once per week by custodial staff wearing opaque goggles to mitigate SCP-031's effect. Description: SCP-031 is an amorphous organism, with a mass of 75 kilograms. SCP-031 is able to move at a pace of 3 km per hour and leaves a trail of oil when it moves. It is only capable of rudimentary physical movement. Testing of recovered tissue samples has shown that SCP-031 is at least partially composed of human muscle and epidermal tissue. SCP-031 is capable of reproducing human speech in any pitch or tone, although it is not currently known how SCP-031's biology produces them. Subjects directly perceiving SCP-031 will see it as an individual the subjects knew and had a romantic attraction to at some point in their past. When made aware that it is being observed, SCP-031 will claim to be this person, and that they have been left destitute by some event in their past. SCP-031 will use this to attempt to persuade the subject to allow it to stay with them for an extended period of time until it is able to return to a stable situation. This effect applies to all persons who view SCP-031, and research has not determined an upper limit to the number of persons who can be affected by SCP-031 at the same time. After inspecting the residence, SCP-031 may attempt to start a romantic relationship with the subject, and if successful it will begin living in their home. Several cases have been documented where SCP-031 began to actively affect more than one subject at a time, eventually having a nest containing between at least 18 different hotel rooms containing subjects with some form of relation to SCP-031. SCP-031 was recovered following contradictory police records taken after a riot in Redacted. Multiple subjects reported wildly contradictory views about SCP-031's appearance, and initial civilian units were also affected. However, the wide distribution of amnesiacs and inhaled tranquilizers pacified all affected subjects, and NTF Psi-7 was able to recover SCP-031 from the condemned hotel it had taken residence in. As of November 16, 1958, SCP-031 has been classified as safe. Addendum: research has determined that aromantic subjects are not affected by SCP-031. However, all of these subjects will report SCP-031 as being a small, plump humanoid figure with specific features being obscured by dark smoke emanating around the entity in the shape of SCP-031's body. Further testing is required to explain this phenomenon. Further testing has shown that the perception of subjects affected by SCP-1937 is similarly affected. If you ever lived in or around Virginia in the 1970s, you were probably exposed to the story of the Bunny Man. In the tale, an escaped mental patient takes to gutting bunnies and hanging them from a bridge underpass. Later the maniac is said to have graduated to gutting and hanging teens in a similar manner. Locals were cautioned to never be caught near the underpass, which is now known to most people as Bunny Man Bridge on Halloween night. As most young and naive teens go, we don't usually believe in these stories, thinking to ourselves that our parents tell us these stories to stop us going out at night or to keep us away from a place that our parents themselves don't like. This legend apparently seemed to come alive around Halloween night. All our parents would tell us the story of the Bunny Man, and that on All Hallows Eve, he would go hunting around the tunnel. It always seemed to be around the tunnel and never like deep in the woods. If he caught anyone, then he would knock them out, take them to the tunnel, string them up and then just wait for them to awaken. When they did awake from the blackout, he would then toy with the first, making them beg for death. Only when they think the Bunny Man would let them go, he would then gut them, leaving all their insides spread all over the floor. For that reason, us teens never believed our parents of the Bunny Man legend. After all, it happened like 10 years ago and had never been a sighting of him since. We just thought they didn't like us teens going up to that bridge. The village that we lived in was fairly small with only a couple of thousand people, so as you can imagine, there is not much for us teens to do. When it came to Halloween night, we was too old to do trick-or-treating, and staying in was a bore. What else could we do besides egg and loo rolling houses for fun? One night a couple of days before Halloween would start, a friend in our group suggested that we go up to Bunny Man Bridge with a recording device and do some ghost hunting, as they was interested in the legend of the Bunny Man. They thought the story was real and that the Bunny Man was dead. I did tell her myself that the story was made up by our parents to keep away from the underpass, but she would have none of it and complained to us all, "What else have we got to do?" She was right about this, as there was nothing to do in our small town. So with Halloween around the corner, we all decided what we was going to do, what we was going to take with us, and also who was going to take who. As with a party of about 10 teens, we would at least need 2 or 3 cars. Another problem we faced was where to park. Roll on 3 days and it's now the night of All Hallows Eve. Lucky enough we all arranged to meet at the local supermarket just so that we can all travel to Bunny Bridge together in case any of us get lost. This way it is a lot easier on all of us. At the supermarket I meet up with my mate who is really into the paranormal. He shows me to his car and I just couldn't believe my eyes. All the gadgets that he had with him. It was enough to make his own little TV show, but then again he does have a YouTube channel and loves to upload this kind of stuff. Amazing really that he has such a large fan base who all flock to his channel to watch his stuff. With all of us now here, we all gather into our designated cars and take the long hour-and-a-half journey. Lucky for me I just put a few games on my phone. Just for this occasion. The journey itself did seem short, which was a surprise to me, but I guess that is what happens when you take your mind off the journey and concentrate on something else. Hour and a half goes by and we are now at our location. We find a small area for parking just off the side of the road. We park all three of our cars there and start to take the small walk up to the underpass bridge. We are now at the underpass and I have to tell you now, it looked very airy. There was a translucent mist in the area. The lights that shone through had a glare making them look bigger than what they appear to be. A gust blew a chilling wind through the tunnel. It whistled as it passed several bricks sticking out of the wall. It seemed like there was also old bits of rope that hung off the side of the bridge, perhaps UNI students trying to scare people. With the ghost hunting equipment in hand, we now go into the tunnel with the recording device to try and catch any sounds there may be. We also have another device which also notifies us of any ghosts in the area by lighting up. We spend about 10 minutes walking around and recording. We got curious and wanted to see if we had catched anything on the device. My mate rewound the recorder to the beginning and played forward. What we heard gave us chills from head to toe. There was a voice on the recorder. It was a rough voice, like someone who smoked fags all day long. Kill them all, it said. We all looked at each other, our faces white as a ghost. We look around again making sure everyone was with us. However, there was 2 girls in our group that disappeared. We called out for 10 minutes. We again looked to each other thinking that they was playing a joke on us. One of the men in the group spoke up a loud voice just so they 2 girls could overhear. Fair enough, if they want to joke around then maybe they can make their own way home. Again, nothing could be heard from them. Now getting worried for these girls, we decided to split up and go look for them. They couldn't be far. We split up into 3 groups. One group would take one end of the tunnel, the other end, and the last group would search the forest. We must have searched for seems like almost an hour and there was no sight or trace of them at all. Then out of nowhere, we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the road at the entrance of the tunnel. Thinking there was something wrong, we all ran together towards the tunnel. The other 2 groups was there gathered around the entrance like they was hiding something they didn't want us to see. When we got there, that is then we can see why the screaming. I just couldn't believe my eyes. I never thought this would happen. There hanging from the underpass was our 2 mates. Both had been gutted like a fish with their organs all over the floor. Now that recording we heard Gad come back to haunt us. We can't leave them there, one of the group members said, but with a killer hunting us like animals there was no choice. We had to get into our cars, back into town and call the police. Another member of the group just started to scream and pointed down into the tunnel of the underpass. We all looked to where she was pointing and there we could see it. A man dressed up in a bunny outfit suit holding what appears to be a huge meat cleaver and hook. Without any thought, we all ran towards our cars, but the figure itself started to give chase too. Now our lives was on the line and we had to get out of this area. Lucky enough we all managed to get into the cars and head back into town. We all drove over to the police station and told them everything that we seen and heard, even gave them the recording of that haunting voice we heard on the recorder. The police went up to the Bunny Man Bridge. They found our friends strung up by the neck, their innards spread all over the floor. However, when they looked around, they could find no trace of the person. They actually believed one of us did it, but with no evidence none of us got charged. I think back to that terrible day and try to figure out how our friends disappeared without any trace, with no screams, nothing. I know now that I will never return to that place again, never.
We have all heard the tales of the Headless Horseman. The tales differ depending on what part of the world you are from. The myth has been a motif of European folklore since at least the Middle Ages. The Headless Horseman is traditionally depicted of a man upon horseback who is missing his head. Depending on the legend, he can be seen carrying his head, riding headless, or even have a carved flaming pumpkin for a head. My story tells of a young man who hears about this myth and wanted to find out for himself on whether the legend was real or make-believe. He was a real fan of myths and legends, but also believed in mass hysteria. He heard of a town where the legend was the strongest, with reports from almost all of the town folks. Researching this town and making a decision, he booked a plane ticket for the small town of Sleepy Hollow. It is told that in the town of Sleepy Hollow on All Hallows Eve, when the barrier to the afterlife is at its weakest, a horse can be heard riding in the distance. Anyone that is courageous and willing enough to go looking for this sound is greeted by the foul odor of rotten death. The odor makes the people sick to their stomach. Many run home on smelling the foul odor, but the few that do fight and walk on now resides in the city's crazy house. Upon reading this on the internet, the man got all excited, but also remembers that mass hysteria can be a real thing, and all it takes is just one person to witness the myth come alive. After 17 hours, the man had arrived at his designated airport. While walking to the main entrance, he sees his taxi driver that he ordered before you boarded the plane. Where to, said the taxi driver, to Sleepy Hollow if you may. The man got confused as the taxi man gave us this look as to say, here we go again, another one to the nut house. The man shook it off, thinking that maybe he didn't like him somehow. 30 minutes have passed and the man is now at Sleepy Hollow. The taxi drops him off at the local hotel. He pulls off laughing, leaving the man thinking, what on earth does he find funny? As he has arrived one day before All Hallows Eve, he decided that he would walk around town and get the town folks' story of the Headless Horseman. The best place he could think about going would be the local dinner in the public records house. Now at the records house, he could not find a damn thing about this legend he wants to see. Next he went to the local dinner and asked the customers what they believed in about the Headless Horseman. To his dismay, they all answered with the same output. If you go looking for the Headless Horseman, you will lose your mind and will be a forever guest in Sleepy Hollow. But not believing the locals, he wanted to find this out for himself. The man, now back at his hotel room, decides to go on his laptop computer and research the legend a little more. After all, he wanted to see if the Headless Horseman just turned up or whether a ritual would be needed to summon him. Upon researching the legend, he came upon a piece that really caught his interest, and this got him thinking. The website he visited was from the town he was now visiting. But what caught his eyes was this sentence. To whoever processed the head of the demon on his horse, shall have total domain over his soul, and so the demon will do their bidding. After reading more into the legend and visiting a few more websites, the man decides to go to bed. After all, tomorrow night is the big night the demon is supposed to show himself. At about 11 p.m. the man gets together his stuff, camera, ghost machines, and set out into the woods. After all, the walk will take about an hour to get to the spot where the tale has been seen. After what seems to take forever, the man arrives at his destination. Now with his camera out and looking around, he cannot find nor can he hear anything. The man walks around for about 3 hours looking for any signs, but he now gives in and decides to walk back into town. Just as he packs up his stuff and starts walking, he can smell a foul odor that seems to make him heat. Now he hears the click, clacking of what appears to be a horse trotting. The man starts to get excited and again takes out his camera to gather evidence. After looking around for a short time, he can see what seems to be fire in the distance, but this does not make sense as fire does not spread in that way. After a few minutes the fire seems to get bigger and he can now hear the horse. His heart starts pounding hard. I have to get out of here, he told himself, but curiosity kept him in his place. The horse got closer and closer, but the man can still not see where the horse is. He turns around and face to face. He smells the breath of the horse upon his face. Now white as a ghost concealed in his place, his curiosity got the best of him. He just had to look up. Upon looking at the headless creature upon his horse, the demon took out his sword, which seemed to burst into flame, and the last thing the man saw was the sword cutting through his neck. The sword, however, did not cut through his neck, but instead left a burned mark seared into his flesh. His mind instantly gone. He is now the newest member of the nut house at Sleepy Hollow, and that is what he shall remain for the rest of his life.
Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in the largely impoverished areas in and around the Whitechapel district of London in 1888. In both the criminal case files and contemporary journalistic accounts, the killer was called the Whitechapel Murderer and Leather Apron. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved female prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of the East End London. Their throats were cut prior to abdominal mutilations. The removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims led to proposals that their killer had some anatomical or surgical knowledge. Rumors that the murders were connected intensified in September and October 1888, and numerous letters were received by the media outlets in Scotland Yard from individuals purporting to be the murderer. The name Jack the Ripper originated in a letter written by an individual claiming to be the murderer that was disseminated in the media. The letter is widely believed to have been a hoax and may have been written by journalists in an attempt to heighten interest in the story and increase the circulation of their newspapers. The From Hell letter received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee came with half a preserved human kidney, purportedly taken from one of the victims. The public came increasingly to believe in a single serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, mainly because of both the extraordinarily brutal nature of the murders and media coverage of the crimes. Extensive newspaper coverage bestowed widespread and enduring international notoriety on the Ripper, and the legend solidified. A police investigation into a series of 11 brutal murders committed in Whitechapel and Spitalfields between 1888 and 1891 was unable to connect all the killings conclusively to the murders of 1888. 5 victims, Mary Ann Nicholls, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Edales, and Mary Jane Kelly, are known as the Canonical Five, and their murders between 31st August and 9th of November 1888 are often considered the most likely to be linked. The murders were never solved, and the legends surrounding these crimes became a combination of historical research, folklore and pseudo-history. In the mid-19th century, Britain experienced an influx of Irish immigrants who swelled the populations of the major cities, including the East End London. From 1882, Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in Tsarist Russia and other areas of Eastern Europe emigrated into the same area. The parish of Whitechapel in London's East End became increasingly overcrowded, with the population increasing to approximately 80,000 inhabitants by 1888. Work and housing conditions worsened, and a significant economic underclass developed. 55% of children born in the East End died before they were 5 years old. Robbery, violence, and alcohol dependency were commonplace, and the endemic poverty drove many women to prostitution to survive on a daily basis. In October 1888, London's Metropolitan Police Station estimated that there were 62 brothers and 1,200 women working as prostitutes in Whitechapel, with approximately 8,500 people residing in the 233 common lodging houses within Whitechapel every night, with the nightly price of a single bed being £4d and the cost of sleeping upon a lean-to rope stretched across the bedrooms of these houses being £2d for adults or children. The economic problems in Whitechapel were accompanied by a steady rise in social tensions. Between 1886 and 1889, frequent demonstrations led to police intervention and public unrest, such as Bloody Sunday, anti-Semitism, crime, nativism, racism, social disturbances, and severe deprivation influenced public perceptions that Whitechapel was a notorious den of immorality. Such perceptions were strengthened in the autumn of 1888 when the series of vicious and grotesque murders attributed to Jack the Ripper received unprecedented coverage in the media. 1 week later, on September 1888, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered at approximately 6 a.m., near the steps to the doorway of the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. As in the case of Mary Ann Nicholls, the throat was severed by 2 deep cuts. Her abdomen had been cut entirely open, with a section of the flesh from her stomach being placed upon her left shoulder and another section of skin and flesh plus small intestines being removed and placed above her right shoulder. Chapman's autopsy also revealed that her uterus and sections of her bladder and vagina had been removed. At the inquest into Chapman's murder, Elizabeth Long describes having seen Chapman standing outside 29 Hanbury Street at about 5:30 a.m. in the company of a dark-haired man wearing a brown deerstalker hat and dark overcoat, and of a shabby genteel appearance. According to this eyewitness, the man had asked Chapman the question, "Will you?" to which Chapman replied yes. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Edales were both killed in the early morning hours of Sunday, September 30, 1888. Stride's body was discovered at approximately 1 a.m. in Dudfield's Yard, off Burner Street in Whitechapel. The cause of death was a single clear-cut incision, measuring 6 inches across her neck, which had severed her left, carotid artery and her trachea before terminating beneath her right jaw. The absence of any further mutilations to her body has led to uncertainty as to whether Stride's murder was committed by the Ripper, or whether he was interrupted during the attack. Several witnesses later informed police they had seen Stride in the company of a man in or close to Burner Street on the evening of 29th of September and in the early hours of 30th of September, but each gave differing descriptions. Some said that her companion was fair, others dark, some said that he was shabbily dressed, others well dressed. Edales' body was found in Mitre Square in the City of London, 3/4 of an hour after the discovery of the body of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat was severed and her abdomen ripped open by a long, deep, and jagged wound before her intestines had been placed over her right shoulder. The left kidney and the major part of the uterus had been removed, and her face had been disfigured, with her nose severed, her cheeks slashed, and cuts measuring 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch respectively incised through each of her eyelids. A triangular incision the apex of which pointed towards Edales' eye had also been carved upon each of her cheeks, and a section of the auricle and lobe of her right ear was later recovered from her clothing. The police surgeon who conducted the post-mortem upon Edales' body stated his opinion these mutilations would have taken at least 5 minutes to complete. A local cigarette salesman named Joseph Lawland had passed through the square with 2 friends shortly after the murder, and he described seeing a fair-haired man of shabby appearance with a woman who may have been Edales. Lawland's companions were unable to confirm his description. The murders of Stride and Edales ultimately became known as the double event. A section of Edales' bloodied apron was found at the entrance to a tenement in Goulston Street, Whitechapel, at 2:55 a.m. A chalk inscription upon the wall directly above the piece of apron read, "The Jews are the real men that will not be blamed for nothing." The graffito became known as the Goulston Street graffito. The message appeared to imply that Jew or Jews, in general, were responsible for the series of murders, but it is unclear whether the graffito was commonplace in Whitechapel. Police Commissioner Charles Warren feared that the graffito might spark anti-Semitism riots and ordered the writing washed away before dawn. Pathologist Thomas Bond, believed this to be a Ripper murder, though his colleague George Bagster Phillips, who had examined the bodies of 3 previous victims, disagreed. Opinions among writers are also divided between those who suspect Mackenzie's murder copied the modus operandi of Jack the Ripper to deflect suspicion from himself, and those who ascribe this murder to Jack the Ripper. The Pinchin Street torso was the decomposing headless and legless torso of an unidentified woman aged between 30 and 40 discovered beneath a railway arch in Pinchin Street, Whitechapel, on September 10, 1889. Bruising about the victim's back, hip, and arm indicated the decedent had been extensively beaten shortly before her death. The victim's abdomen was also extensively mutilated, although her genitals had not been wounded. She appeared to have been killed approximately 1 day prior to the discovery of her torso. The dismembered sections of her body are believed to have been transported to the railway arch, hidden under an old chemise. At 2:15 in on February 13, 1891, P.C. Ernest Thompson discovered a 25-year-old prostitute named Frances Coles lying beneath a railway arch at Swallows Gardens, Whitechapel. Her throat had been deeply cut but her body was not mutilated, leading some to believe Thompson had disturbed her assailant. Coles was still alive, although she died before medical help could arrive. A 53-year-old stoker, James Thomas Sadler, had earlier been seen drinking with Coles, and the two are known to have argued approximately 3 hours before her death. Sadler was arrested by the police and charged with her murder. He was briefly thought to be the Ripper but was later discharged from the court for a lack of evidence on March 3, 1891. A large number of attacks against women in the East End during this time adds uncertainty to how many victims were murdered by the same individual. 11 separate murders, stretching from April 3, 1888 to February 13, 1891, were included in a London Metropolitan Police Service investigation and were known collectively in the police docket as the Whitechapel murders. Opinions vary as to whether these murders should be linked to the same culprit, but 5 of the 11 Whitechapel murders, known as the Canonical Five, are widely believed to be the work of Jack the Ripper. Most experts point to deep slash wounds to the throat, followed by the extensive abdominal and genital area mutilation, the removal of internal organs, and progressive facial mutilations as the distinctive features of the Ripper's modus operandi. The first 2 cases in the Whitechapel murder file, those of Emma Elizabeth Smith and Martha Tabram, are not included in the Canonical Five. Smith was robbed and sexually assaulted in Osborne Street, Whitechapel, at approximately 1:30 a.m. on April 3, 1888. She had been bludgeoned about the face and received a cut to her ear. A blunt object was also inserted into her vagina, rupturing her peritoneum. She developed peritonitis and died the following day at London Hospital. Smith stated that she had been attacked by 2 or 3 men, one of whom she described as a teenager. This attack was linked to the later murders by the press, but most authors attribute Smith's murder to general East End gang violence unrelated to the Ripper case. Tabram was murdered on a staircase landing on George Yard, Whitechapel, on August 7, 1888. She had suffered 39 stab wounds to her throat, lungs, heart, liver, spleen, stomach, and abdomen, with additional knife wounds inflicted to her breast and vagina. All but one of Tabram's wounds had been inflicted with a bladed instrument such as a penknife, and one possible exception, all the wounds had been inflicted by a right-handed individual. Tabram had not been raped. The savagery of this murder, the lack of an obvious motive, and the closeness of the location and date to the later canonical Ripper murders led police to link this murder to those later committed by Jack the Ripper. However, this murder differs from the later canonical murders because although Tabram had been relatedly stabbed, she had not suffered any slash wounds to her throat or abdomen. Many experts do not connect Tabram's murder with the later murders because of this difference in the wound pattern. The canonical 5 Ripper victims are Mary Ann Nicholls, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Edales, and Mary Jane Kelly. The body of Mary Ann Nicholls was discovered at about 3:40 on Friday, August 31, 2020 in Bucks Row, Whitechapel. Nicholls had last been seen alive approximately 1 hour before the discovery of her body by a Mrs. Emily Holland, with whom she had previously shared a bed at a common lodging house in Thrall Street, Spitalfields, walking in the direction of Whitechapel Road. Her throat was severed by 2 deep cuts, one of which completely severed all the tissue down to the vertebrae. Her vagina had been stabbed twice, and the lower part of her abdomen was partly ripped open by a deep, jagged wound, causing her bowels to protrude. Several other incisions inflicted to both sides of her abdomen had also been caused by the same knife. Each of these wounds had been inflicted in a downward thrusting manner. 1 week later, on September 1888, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered at approximately 6 a.m., near the steps to the doorway of the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. As in the case of Mary Ann Nicholls, the throat was severed by 2 deep cuts. Her abdomen had been cut entirely open, with a section of the flesh from her stomach being placed upon her left shoulder and another section of skin and flesh plus small intestines being removed and placed above her right shoulder. Chapman's autopsy also revealed that her uterus and sections of her bladder and vagina had been removed. At the inquest into Chapman's murder, Elizabeth Long describes having seen Chapman standing outside 29 Hanbury Street at about 5:30 a.m. in the company of a dark-haired man wearing a brown deerstalker hat and dark overcoat, and of a shabby genteel appearance. According to this eyewitness, the man had asked Chapman the question, "Will you?" to which Chapman replied yes. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddaws were both killed in the early morning hours of Sunday, September 30, 1888. Stride's body was discovered at approximately 1 a.m. in Dugfield's Yard, off Berners Street in Whitechapel. The cause of death was a single clear-cut incision, measuring 6 inches across her neck, which had severed her left, carotid artery and her trachea before terminating beneath her right jaw. The absence of any further mutilations to her body has led to uncertainty as to whether Stride's murder was committed by the Ripper, or whether he was interrupted during the attack. Several witnesses later informed police they had seen Stride in the company of a man in or close to Berners Street on the evening of 29th of September and in the early hours of 30th of September, but each gave differing descriptions. Some said that her companion was fair, others dark, some said that he was shabbily dressed, others well dressed. Edales' body was found in Mitre Square in the City of London, 3/4 of an hour after the discovery of the body of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat was severed and her abdomen ripped open by a long, deep, and jagged wound before her intestines had been placed over her right shoulder. The left kidney and the major part of the uterus had been removed, and her face had been disfigured, with her nose severed, her cheeks slashed, and cuts measuring 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch respectively incised through each of her eyelids. A triangular incision the apex of which pointed towards Eddaws' eye had also been carved upon each of her cheeks, and a section of the auricle and lobe of her right ear was later recovered from her clothing. The police surgeon who conducted the post-mortem upon Eddaws' body stated his opinion these mutilations would have taken at least 5 minutes to complete. A local cigarette salesman named Joseph Long had passed through the square with 2 friends shortly after the murder, and he described seeing a fair-haired man of shabby appearance with a woman who may have been Eddaws. Law's companions were unable to confirm his description. The murders of Stride and Eddaws ultimately became known as the double event. A section of Eddaws' bloodied apron was found at the entrance to a tenement in Goulston Street, Whitechapel, at 2:55 a.m. A chalk inscription upon the wall directly above the piece of apron read, "The Jews are the real men that will not be blamed for nothing." The graffito became known as the Goulston Street graffito. The message appeared to imply that Jew or Jews, in general, were responsible for the series of murders, but it is unclear whether the graffito was commonplace in Whitechapel. Police Commissioner Charles Warren feared that the graffito might spark anti-Semitism riots and ordered the writing washed away before dawn. The extensively mutilated and disemboweled body of Mary Jane Kelly was discovered lying on the bed in the single room where she lived at 13 Miller's Court, off Dorset Street, Spitalfields, at 10:45 a.m. on Friday, November 9, 1888. Her face had been hacked beyond all recognition, with her throat severed down to the spine, and the abdomen almost emptied of its organs. Her uterus, kidneys and one breast had been placed beneath her head, and other viscera from her body placed beside her foot, about the bed and sections of her abdomen and thighs upon a bedside table. The heart was missing from the crime scene. Each of the canonical 5 murders was perpetrated at night, on or close to a weekend, either at the end of a month or a week. The mutilations became increasingly severe as the series of murders proceeded, except for that of Stride, whose attacker may have been interrupted. Nicholls was not missing organs. Chapman's uterus and sections of her bladder and vagina were taken. Eddaws had her uterus and left kidney removed and her face mutilated, and Kelly's body was extensively eviscerated, with her face gashed in all directions and the tissue of her neck being severed to the bone, although the heart was the sole body organ missing from this crime scene. Historically, the belief these 5 canonical 5 murders were committed by the same perpetrator is derived from contemporary documents which link them together to the exclusion of others. In 1894, Sir Melville Macnaghten, Assistant Chief Constable of the Metropolitan Police Service and head of the Criminal Investigation Department, wrote a report that stated the Whitechapel murderer had 5 victims and 5 victims only. Similarly, the canonical 5 victims were linked together in a letter written by Police Surgeon Thomas Bond to Robert Anderson, head of London CID, on November 10, 1888. Some researchers have posited that some of the murders were undoubtedly the work of a single killer, but an unknown larger number of killers acting independently were responsible for the other crimes. Authors Stuart P. Evans and Donald Rumbelow argue that the canonical 5 is a Ripper myth and that 3 cases Nicholls, Chapman, and Edales can be definitely linked to the same perpetrator, but that less certainty exists as to whether Stride and Kelly were also murdered by the same individual. Conversely, others suppose that the 6 murders between Tabram and Kelly were the work of a single killer. Dr. Percy Clark, assistant to the examining pathologist George Bagster Phillips, linked only 3 murders and thought that the others were perpetrated by weak-minded individuals induced to emulate the crime. Macnaghten did not join the police force until the year after the murders, and his memorandum contains serious factual errors about possible suspects. Mary Jane Kelly is generally considered to be the Ripper's final victim, and it is assumed that the crimes ended because of the culprit's death, imprisonment, institutionalization, or emigration. The Whitechapel murder file details another 4 murders that occurred after the canonical 5, those of Rose Milett, Alice Mackenzie, the Pinchin Street torso, and Francis Coles. The strangled body of 26-year-old Rose Milett was found in Clark's Yard, High Street, Popular on December 20, 1888. There was no sign of a struggle, and the police believed that she had either accidentally hanged herself with her collar while in a drunken stupor or committed suicide. However, faint markings left by a cord on her neck suggest Milett had been strangled. At the inquest into Milett's death, the jury returned a verdict of murder. Alice Mackenzie was murdered shortly after midnight on 17 July 1889 in Castle Alley, Whitechapel. She had suffered 2 stab wounds to her neck, and her left carotid artery had been severed. Several minor bruises and cuts were found on her body, which also bore a 7-inch-long superficial wound extending beneath her left breast and her navel. One of the examining pathologists, Thomas Bond, believed this to be a Ripper murder, though his colleague George Bagster Phillips, who had examined the bodies of 3 previous victims, disagreed. Opinions among writers are also divided between those who suspect Mackenzie's murder copied the modus operandi of Jack the Ripper to deflect suspicion from himself, and those who ascribe this murder to Jack the Ripper. The Pinchin Street torso was the decomposing headless and legless torso of an unidentified woman aged between 30 and 40 discovered beneath a railway arch in Pinchin Street, Whitechapel, on September 10, 1889. Bruising about the victim's back, hip, and arm indicated the decedent had been extensively beaten shortly before her death. The victim's abdomen was also extensively mutilated, although her genitals had not been wounded. She appeared to have been killed approximately 1 day prior to the discovery of her torso. The dismembered sections of her body are believed to have been transported to the railway arch, hidden under an old chemise. At 2:15 on February 13, 1891, P.C. Ernest Thompson discovered a 25-year-old prostitute named Frances Coles lying beneath a railway arch at Swallows Gardens, Whitechapel. Her throat had been deeply cut but her body was not mutilated, leading some to believe Thompson had disturbed her assailant. Coles was still alive, although she died before medical help could arrive. A 53-year-old stoker, James Thomas Sadler, had earlier been seen drinking with Coles, and the two are known to have argued approximately 3 hours before her death. Sadler was arrested by the police and charged with her murder. He was briefly thought to be the Ripper but was later discharged from the court for lack of evidence on March 3, 1891. In addition to the 11 Whitechapel murders, commentators have linked other attacks to the Ripper. In the case of Fairy Faye, it is unclear whether this attack was real or fabricated as a part of Ripper lore. Fairy Faye was a nickname given to an unidentified woman whose body was allegedly found in a doorway close to Commercial Road on December 26, 1887 after a stake had been thrust through her abdomen, but there was unrecorded murders in Whitechapel at or around Christmas 1887. Fairy Faye seems to have been created through a confused press report of the murder of Emma Elizabeth Smith, who had a stick or other blunt object shoved into her vagina. Most authors agree that the victim Fairy Faye never existed. A 38-year-old widow named Annie Millwood was admitted to the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary with numerous stab wounds to her legs and lower torso on February 25, 1888, informing staff she had been attacked with a clasp knife by an unknown man. She was later discharged but died from apparently natural causes on 31st of March. Millwood was later postulated to be the Ripper's first victim, although his attack cannot be definitively linked to the perpetrator. Another suspected pre-canonical victim was a young dressmaker named Zeta Wilson, who reportedly survived being stabbed twice in the neck with a clasp knife upon the doorstep of her home in Bow on March 28, 1888. A further suspected pre-canonical victim, Annie Farmer, resided at the same lodging house as Martha Tabram and reported an attack on November 21, 1888. She had received a superficial cut to her throat. Although a known man with blood on his mouth and hands had run out of this lodging house, shouting, "Look at what she had done." Before 2 eyewitnesses heard Farmer scream, her wound was possibly self-inflicted. The Whitehall Mystery was a term coined for the discovery of a headless torso of a woman on October 2, 1888 in the basement of the new Metropolitan Police headquarters being built in Whitehall. An arm and shoulder belonging to the body were previously buried near where the torso was found on 17th of October. The other limbs and head were never recovered and the body was never identified. The mutilations were similar to those in the Pinchin Street torso case, where the legs and head were severed but not the arms. Both the Whitehall Mystery and Pinchin Street case may have been part of a series of murders known as the Thames Mysteries, committed by a single serial killer dubbed the Torso Killer. It is debatable whether Jack the Ripper and the Torso Killer were the same people or separate killers active in the same area. The modus operandi of the Torso Killer differed from that of the Ripper, and police at the time discounted any connection between the two. Only one of the 4 victims linked to the Torso Killer was identified, Elizabeth Jackson. She was a 24-year-old prostitute from Chelsea whose various body parts were collected from the River Thames over a 3-week period between 31 May and June 25, 1889. On December 29, 1888, the body of a 7-year-old boy named John Gill was found in a stable clock in Manningham, Bradford. Gill had been missing since 27 of December. His legs had been severed, his abdomen opened, his intestines partly drawn out, and his heart and one ear removed. Similarities with the Ripper murders led to press speculation that the Ripper had killed him. The boy's employer, 23-year-old milkman William Barrett, was twice arrested for the murder but was released due to insufficient evidence. No one was ever prosecuted. Carrie Brown, nicknamed Shakespeare reportedly for her habit of quoting Shakespeare's sonnet, was strangled with clothing and then mutilated with a knife on April 24, 1891 in New York City. Her body was found with a large tear through her groin area and superficial cuts on her legs and back. No organs were removed from the scene, though an ovary was found upon the bed, either purposely removed or unintentionally dislodged. At the time, the murder was compared to those in Whitechapel, though the Metropolitan Police eventually ruled out any connection. The vast majority of the City of London police files relating to their investigation into the Whitechapel murders were destroyed in the Blitz. The surviving Metropolitan Police files allow a detailed view of investigation procedures in the Victorian era. A large team of policemen conducted house-to-house inquiries throughout Whitechapel. Forensic material was collected and examined. Suspects were identified, traced, and either examined more closely or eliminated from the inquiry. Modern police work follows the same pattern. More than 2,000 people were interviewed. Upwards of 300 people were investigated, and 80 people were detained. Following the murders of Scheid and Eddaws, the Commissioner of the City Police, Sir James Fraser, offered a reward of £500 for the arrest of the Ripper. The investigation was initially conducted by the Metropolitan Police Whitechapel Division Criminal Investigation Department headed by Detective Inspector Edmund Reed. After the murder of Nicholls, Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline, Henry Moore, and Walter Andrews were sent from Central Office at Scotland Yard to assist. The City of London Police were involved under Detective Inspector James McWilliam after the Eddaws murder, which occurred within the City of London. The overall direction of the murder inquiries was hampered by the fact the newly appointed head of the CID Robert Anderson was on leave in Switzerland between 7 September and 6 October, during the time when Chapman, Stride, and Edales were killed. This prompted Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren to appoint Chief Inspector Donald Swanson to coordinate the inquiry from Scotland Yard. Butchers, slaughters, surgeons, and physicians were suspected because of the manner of the mutilations. A surviving note from Major Henry Smith, acting commissioner of the City Police, indicates that the alibis of local butchers and slaughters were investigated, with the result that they were eliminated from the inquiry. A report from Inspector Swanson to the Home Office confirms that 76 butchers and slaughters were visited and that the inquiry encompassed all their employees for the previous 6 months. Some contemporary figures, including Queen Victoria, thought the pattern of murders indicated that the culprit was a butcher or cattle drover on one of the cattle boats that plied between London and mainland Europe. Whitechapel was close to the London docks, and usually, such boats docked on Thursday or Friday and departed on Saturday or Sunday. The cattle boats were examined but the dates of the murders did not coincide with a single boat's movements and the transfer of a crewman between boats was also ruled out. Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. In September 1888, a group of volunteer citizens in London's East End formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. They patrolled the streets looking for suspicious characters, partly because of dissatisfaction with the failure of police to apprehend the perpetrator, and also because some members were concerned that the murders were affecting businesses in the area. The committee petitioned the government to raise rewards for information leading to the arrest of the killer, offered their own reward for information leading to his capture, and hired private detectives to question witnesses independently. At the end of October, Robert Anderson asked Police Surgeon Thomas Bond to give his opinion on the extent of the murderer's surgical skill and knowledge. The opinion offered by Bond on the character of the Whitechapel murderer is the earliest surviving offender profile. Bond's assessment was based on his own examination of the most extensively mutilated victim and the post-mortem notes from the 4 previous canonical murders. He wrote, "All 5 murders no doubt were committed by the same hand. In the first 4 the throats appear to have been cut from left to right, In the last case, owing to the extensive mutilation, it is impossible to say in what direction the fatal cut was made, but arterial blood was found on the wall in splashes close to where the woman's head must have been lying. All the circumstances surrounding the murders lead me to form the opinion that the women must have been lying down when murdered, and in every case, the throat was first cut. Bond was strongly opposed to the idea that the murderer possessed any kind of scientific or anatomical knowledge, or even the technical knowledge of a butcher or horse slaughter. In his opinion, the killer must have been a man of solitary habits, subject to periodical attacks of homicidal and erotic mania, with the character of the mutilations possibly indicating satyriasis. Bond also stated that religious mania may have been the original disease, but I do not think either hypothesis is likely. There is no evidence the perpetrator engaged in sexual activity with any of the victims, yet psychologists suppose that the penetration of the victims with a knife and leaving them on display in sexually degrading positions with the wounds exposed indicates that the perpetrator derived sexual pleasure from the attacks. This view is challenged by others, who dismissed such hypotheses as insupportable supposition. In addition to the contradictions and unreliability of contemporary accounts, attempts to identify the murderer are hampered by the lack of any surviving forensic evidence. DNA analysis on extant letters is inconclusive, the available material has been handled many times and is too contaminated to provide meaningful results. There have been mutually incompatible claims that DNA evidence points conclusively to two different suspects, and the methodology of both has also been criticized. Suspects. The concentration of the killings around weekends and public holidays and within a short distance of each other has indicated to many that the tipper was in regular employment and lived locally. Others have thought that the killer was an educated upper-class man, possibly a doctor or an aristocrat who ventured into Whitechapel from a more well-to-do area. Such theories draw on cultural perceptions such as fear of the medical profession, mistrust of modern science, or the exploitation of the poor by the rich. Suspects proposed years after the murders include virtually anyone remotely connected to the case by contemporary documents, as well as many famous names who were never considered in the police investigation, including a member of the British royal family, an artist, and a physician. Everyone alive at the time is now long dead, and modern authors are free to accuse anyone without any need for any supporting historical evidence. Suspects named in contemporary police documents include 3 in Sir Melville Macnaghten's 1894 memorandum, but the evidence against these individuals is, at best, circumstantial. There are many, varied theories about the identity and profession of Jack the Ripper, but authorities are not agreed upon any on them, and the number of named suspects reaches over 100. Despite continued interest in the case, the Ripper's identity remains unknown. The term Ripperology was coined to describe the study and analysis of the Ripper cases, and have inspired numerous works of fiction. Over the course of the Whitechapel murders, the police, newspapers, and other individuals received hundreds of letters regarding the case. Some letters were well-intentioned offers of advice as to how to catch a killer, but the vast majority were either hoaxes or generally useless. The Dear Boss letter dated 25th of September and postmarked September 27, 1888, was received that day by the Central News Agency and was forwarded to Scotland Yard on 29th of September. Initially, it was considered a hoax, but when Edales' ear appears to have been nicked by the incidentally during his attack, and the letter writer's threat to send the ears to the police was never carried out. The name Jack the Ripper was first used in this letter by the signatory and gained worldwide notoriety after its publication. Most of the letters that followed copied this letter's tone. Some sources claim that another letter dated September 17, 1888 was the first to use the name Jack the Ripper, but most experts believe that it was fake inserted into police records in the 20th century. The Saucy Jackie postcard was postmarked October 1, 1888 and was the same day by the Central News Agency. The handwriting was similar to the Dear Boss letter, and mentioned the canonical murders committed on 30th of September, which the author refers to by writing "Do believe in this time." It has been argued that the postcard was posted before the murders were publicized, making it unlikely that a crank would hold such knowledge of the crime. However, it was postmarked more than 24 hours after the killings occurred, long after the details of the murders were known and publicized by journalists, and had become general community gossip by the residents of Whitechapel. The From Hell letter was received by George Lusk, leader of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, on October 16, 1888. The handwriting and style unlike that of the Dear Boss letter and Saucy Jackie postcard. The letter came with a small box in which Lusk discovered half of a human kidney. Some contend that it belonged to Edales, while others argue that it was a macabre practical joke. The kidney was examined by Dr. Thomas Openshaw of the London Hospital, who determined that it was human and from the left side, but, contrary to the newspaper reports, he could not determine any other biological characteristics. Openshaw subsequently also received a letter signed Jack the Ripper. Scotland Yard published facsimiles of the Dear Boss letter and the postcard on 3 October, in the ultimately vain hope that a member of the public would recognize the handwriting. Charles Warren explained in a letter to Godfrey Lushington, Permanent Under-Secretary of State for the Home Department. I think the whole thing a hoax, but we are bound to try and ascertain the writer in any case. On October 7, 1888, George R. Sims in the Sunday newspaper Referee implied scathingly that the letter was written by a journalist to hurl the circulation of a newspaper sky high. Police officials later claimed to have identified a specific journalist as the author of both the Dear Boss letter and the postcard. The journalist was identified as Tom Bullen in a letter from Chief Inspector John Littlechild to George R. Sims dated September 23, 1923. A journalist named Fred Best reportedly confessed in 1931 that he and a colleague at the Star had written the letters signed Jack the Ripper to heighten interest in the murders and keep the business alive. The Ripper murders mark an important watershed in the treatment of crime by a journalist. Jack the Ripper was not the first serial killer, but his case was the first to create a worldwide media frenzy. The Elementary Education Act 1880 made school attendance compulsory regardless of class. As such, by 1888, more working-class people in England and Wales were literate. Tax reforms in the 1850s had enabled the publication of inexpensive newspapers with a wider circulation. The mushroomed in the later Victorian era to include mass circulation newspapers costing as little as a halfpenny, along with popular magazines such as the Illustrated Police News, which made the Ripper the beneficiary of previously unparalleled publicity. Consequently, at the height of the investigation, over 1 million copies of newspapers with extensive coverage devoted to the Whitechapel murders were sold each day. However, many of the articles were sensationalistic and speculative, and false information was regularly printed as fact. In addition, several articles speculating as to the identity of the Ripper alluded to local xenophobic rumors that the perpetrator was either Jewish or foreign. In early September, 6 days after the murder of Mary Ann Nicholls, the Manchester Guardian reported, "Whatever information may be in the possession of the police, they deem it necessary to keep secret. It is believed their attention is particularly directed to." A notorious character known as Leather Apron appeared in the press, but rival journalists dismissed these as a mythical outgrowth of the reporter's fancy. John Pfizer, a local Jew who made footwear from leather, was known by the name Leather Apron and was arrested, even though the investigating inspector reported that at present, there is no evidence whatsoever against him. He was soon released after the confirmation of his alibis. After the publication of the Dear Boss letter, Jack the Ripper supplanted Leather Apron as the name adopted by the press and public to describe the killer. The name Jack was already used to describe another fabled London attacker, Spring-Heeled Jack, who supposedly leaped over walls to strike his victims and escape as quickly as he came. The invention and adoption of a nickname for a particular killer became standard media practice, with examples such as the X-Men of New Orleans, the Boston Strangler, and the Beltway Sniper. Examples derived from Jack the Ripper include the French Ripper, the Dusseldorf Ripper, the Camden Ripper, the Blackout Ripper, Jack the Stripper, the Yorkshire Ripper, and the Rostov Ripper. Sensational press reports combined with the fact that no one was ever convicted of the murders have confused scholarly analysis and created a legend that casts a shadow over later serial killers. The nature of the Ripper murders and the impoverished lifestyle of the victims drew attention to the poor living conditions in the East End and galvanized public opinion against the overcrowded, unsanitary slums. In the 2 decades after the murders, the worst of the slums were cleared and demolished, but the streets and some buildings survive, and the legend of the Ripper is still promoted by various guided tours of the murder sites and other locations pertaining to the case. For many years, the 10 Bells public house in Commercial Street was the focus of tours. In the immediate aftermath of the murders and later, Jack the Ripper became the children's bogeyman. Depictions were often phantasmagoric or monstrous. In the 1920s and 1930s, he was depicted in film dressed in everyday clothes as a man with a hidden secret, preying on his unsuspecting victims. Atmosphere and evil are suggested through lighting effects and shadow play. By the 1960s, the Ripper had become the symbol of a predatory aristocracy and was more often portrayed in a top hat dressed as a gentleman. The establishment as a whole became the villain, with the Ripper acting as a manifest hint of upper-class exploitation. The image of the Ripper merged with or borrowed symbols from horror stories, such as Dracula's Cloak or Victor Frankenstein's Organ Harvest. The fictional world of the Ripper can fuse with multiple genres, ranging from Sherlock Holmes to Japanese erotic horror. Jack the Ripper features hundreds of works of fiction and works which straddle the boundaries between fact and fiction, including The Ripper Letters and A Hoax Diary. The Diary of Jack the Ripper. The Ripper rears in novels, short stories, poems, comic books, games, songs, plays, operas, television programs, and films. More than 100 non-fiction works exclusively with the Jack the Ripper murders, making it one of the most written about true crime subjects. The term Ripperology was coined by Colin Wilson in the 1970s to describe the study of the case by professionals and amateurs. The periodicals Ripperana, Ripperologist, and Ripper Notes published their research. In 2015, the Jack the Ripper Museum opened in East London, to minor protests. There is no waxwork figure of Jack the Ripper at Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors, unlike numerous murderers of lesser fame, in accordance with their policy of modeling persons whose likeness is known. He is instead depicted as a shadow. In 2006, a BBC History magazine poll selected Jack the Ripper as the worst Briton in history.
Item, SCP-025. Object Class, Safe. Special Containment Procedures, SCP-025 is only to be opened during testing, as is the room in which SCP-025 is stored. Entry codes are to be given only to authorized research and security personnel. No other containment protocols required. Description: SCP-025 is a wooden wardrobe measuring 0.97 meters by 0.62 meters by 1.95 meters, full of clothing dating from a number of time periods. Articles contained within the chest, collectively named SCP-025-1, match with styles of decades from the 1920s to the present. The apparel from each time frame varies with regard to style. For example, a polyester striped shirt and pair of charcoal suit pants both correspond with general styles of the 1970s. The only unifying aspect of every article contained in SCP-025 is that each one is in poor condition. Moths have eaten at much of the collection, and tears and runs are not uncommon. When any item from SCP-025 is put on, the wearer is observed either to die or suffer an injury within 24 hours. The cause of death or injury in these instances is invariably linked to the aforementioned flaws in the clothing, but only ever appears to be an unrelated incident. Wearing a glove with a fingertip cut off may result in the loss of the fingertip through a simple kitchen accident like chopping onions. Similarly, a subject wearing a poncho with a sleeve missing will somehow cause the loss of the uncovered arm, be it an attack by a wild animal or a vehicular accident that necessitates the amputation of the limb. If placed in a sealed, unfurnished enclosure while wearing an item from the chest, the wearer will either seemingly spontaneously contract a flesh-eating disease that begins in the areas not covered by the clothing, or suffer the failure of an organ located beneath an imperfection in the article. Diseases arising from such incidents may or may not be contagious. No study has been successfully undertaken due to the speed at which the strains observed run their course. Recommended that, if possible, samples of the disease be taken to lab for possible weaponization. Following is an abridged testing log of SCP-025. More thorough testing will accompany the declassification of the document in its entirety. Test log SCP-025, Section 1. Subject, D778, a 42-year-old white male. Article, 1940s-era white tuxedo. Imperfections, torn seam in left shoulder. Test results, subject was allowed free roam of the halls, under agent data expunged supervision. For approximately 45 minutes, nothing eventful occurred. However, at data expunged, security tapes and eyewitnesses indicate that D778 appeared to make an attempt at attacking agent data expunged. He in turn overcame the subject with a knife, causing an inch-deep gash in D778's left shoulder precisely at the point where the tuxedo's seam was ripped. Test halted, subject later terminated. Subject, D690, a 26-year-old white male. Article, 2004 Boston Red Sox baseball cap. Imperfections, missing size adjuster in back of cap. Logo in front partially removed. Test results, placed in a sealed room with the subject was a table on which were a loaded Jericho Baby Eagle 9mm handgun, a grill lighter, and a hatchet. D690 chose to wear the cap backward for the test. Potential effects of this decision on the outcome of the test are unknown. Subject expressed reluctance to touch any of the objects on the table for several hours. Food and water were provided as necessary. After 4 hours of general inactivity, subject picked up the handgun and examined it. While holding it at roughly eye level, the weapon discharged into D690's forehead, where the size adjustment band would have been. The round exited the subject near the part of the hat with the missing part of the logo. Subjects, D736, a 22-year-old white male, D771, a 23-year-old white male. Article, burgundy striped sweater vest, dating from 1973. Imperfections, article seemed to have been partially eaten by moths. Several large holes in the front of the sweater. Test results, D736 was asked by researching staff to wear the sweater vest, which he did under duress. D771 was given a loaded handgun out of sight of the other test participant and instructed to, on a given signal, fire all 6 shots in the direction of D736. After doing so, it was noted that every shot fired passed through one of the holes in the sweater vest, leaving the clothing intact and killing D736. Firearm retrieved, surviving subject transported back to quarters. Subject, Dr. Data expunged, unplanned experiment, An unidentified individual left an article from Scp-025 on Dr. Data Expunged desk that looked similar to an item of his own clothing. Any information about this incident and/or the perpetrator of same should be reported immediately to senior staff. Article: Lightweight scarf, dyed a number of colors. Imperfections: heavily pulled seam caused scarf to be considerably shorter and tighter in the middle. Test results: according to his itinerary, Dr. Data Expunged, wearing the item from Scp-025, was en route to the enclosure of SCP Data Expunged on Data Expunged for routine testing. However, he diverged from his intended path and began in a direction towards an entirely separate wing of the facility. Subject then entered the enclosure of SCP-173 without gathering accompaniment or following safety procedures, and, upon hearing the door closing, blinked. Cause of death listed as strangulation resulting from a crushed windpipe. Subject: D802, a 30-year-old Hispanic female. Article: 1980s flash dance, style white shirt. Imperfections: right shoulder removed, left sleeve completely cut off, entire bottom hem shredded. Test results: Data Expunged. All present were presumed infected, then quarantined and data expunged. All further tests involving 1980s-era fashion have been postponed indefinitely due to the expenditures and safety hazards presented by the aforementioned experiment. Full cleanup estimated to take an additional data expunged weeks.
Ever since the phone was invented in 1876, there have been reports of all different numbers that was supposed to be haunted, or if you call them, then you would get a very airy answer on the other end telling you that you would have so many days left to live. Think of it like the Ring movie. You watch the video and then your phone rings telling you that you have 7 days to live. Anyway, back to topic. There is one such number out there that has now become some king of challenge, especially to the YouTube community. They would call the number and you can hear creepy things in the background and other noises, but when you call the number back again, it doesn't seem to work. What makes things worse, the damn number don't even show on your phone bill. I have read and watched many stories like this, thinking, no way is this true. One such article I came across was in the local newspaper. A woman breastfeeding her child got 48 messages, all the messages was from the same person. This person name so happened to be Satan. In these messages, it just repeated the same message: you have 3 days to die. All these messages came after she missed one phone call from this number. I didn't believe in this. I thought this was made up by some person looking to get famous on YouTube, and then it became one of these so-called challenges that these YouTubers would do for their viewers. Well, that wasn't till about 2 days ago that story changed my mind. You see, I was with a few of my mates driving down to the drive-thru. We was about halfway there when I got a phone call. I looked at the number but was shocked at what number I saw. The number on my phone came up as 666, 666, 6666. I thought to myself, really, some phone company actually gave this number to a person who asked for it. I showed my friends, who started laughing and again couldn't believe the number that came up. My friends told me to answer the phone and put it on to speaker, so this is what I did. I must admit, What I had next did indeed really creep me out, but my friends just kept on laughing as if they had set up the prank themselves just to scare the living daylights out of me.
You will die in 3 days.
But my friends just kept on laughing as if they had set up the prank themselves just to scare the living daylights out of me. There seemed to be an echo on the other end of the phone call, static with someone telling me that I would die in 3 days' time. The phone hung up. I looked towards my mates, whom went from laughing out loud to now giggling under their breath. "Can you believe the nerves of some people?" I told them as I continued to stare at the screen of my phone. One of my mates told me that I should ring the number back and give them a what for. The other friend agreed, and I must admit, I had to do this as I was left a little shaken. I went to my call history to call back the number, but was shocked to find that the number that called me was not even in the call history. Luckily enough, the number itself was quite easy to remember, so I inputted the number into my phone and pressed the call button. I shit you not, if I was freaked out before then, right now, I am shitting bricks, for you see, the only thing I got back from that call was that the number was not recognized.
Anyone who lives in the southwest of New Mexico can tell you about the story of the Chupacabra. I will say it is more than an urban legend because there has been so many sightings and even photo and video evidence of the creature. The Chupacabra is a rabid, dog-like creature and could or could not be the size of a bear, but this creature definitely has spikes on its back and glowing eyes. Stories go that it could also fly if it wants to, but one thing I do know. This creature will suck the blood from the neck of your pets, livestock and even other wildlife. The Chupacabra was first spotted in 1996 back in Puerto Rico, and eyewitnesses dubbed the creature as the goat sucker. It has been a steady trope across Central America, reaching a heat in Mexico and the Southwest over the 2 decades, with New Mexico being most of the source of the sightings. However, now that I have told you the story of the Chupacabra, its first sightings, what it looks like and where it came from, this story is about how my father, who owned a farm down in New Mexico, he raised several animals down on his farm, but the one animal he raised more than any other was the goat. He just loved the animal. I still don't know why to this day, but one thing I will admit is on how interesting these animals was. If anyone ever took the time to study goats, then they would know. I would love watching when my father would go to the field and they all would come running to him for their feed or even for a fuss. It was too amazing on how high they could jump too. Anyway, one day in the morning light, when my father had his breakfast and got ready, he went out for the daily routine of feeding the animals. He went to the cows first and fed them their hay, next to the pigs and gave them slop. We all know how pigs will eat just about anything these days. His last stop was the goats. However, because the goats lived in a large field, he would have to call them over. I can't believe myself that he actually trained the goats to come to him with a single whistle. I must admit, it was a sight to behold. Watching them all come running, it was like the world's biggest carpet running towards you. My dad looked on as the goats came running for their morning feed, but that morning there was something wrong. He decided to count the goats, as he kept around 150 of them. He counted over and over but always came up 2 goats short. He started to panic a little, but then remembered that they must be up to the field somewhere and decided to take a look a little later in the day after he had completed all his daily tasks. He still had to clean out the pigs, clean out the horses and also give them their feed. There was also the chickens to feed too. So many animals with so little time. Our farm also grew food too, sweet corn and wheat, so he had to go out and miss the fields so the crop wouldn't get eaten. It was into the evening when my father had finished all his chores for the day. When he got back to the house, He decided to have his dinner and then would go out and recount the goats again to see if those missing two had turned up. After dinner, he went and got his ATV, as I had stated before. The field was quite large and would have taken him into the night while looking and counting the goats. Lucky thing he had spray-painted numbers onto the goats to make things easier. He went up into the field and started driving around looking for all the goats. They were scattered all over the field here and there. It was awkward, to say the least, but he managed to round them up into one of the corners to count them. Still again, he came up missing two goats. This time he managed to find out what numbers were missing, number 10 and number 99 it seemed, a female and a male. My dad looked toward me and told me that they must have jumped the fence. They are after all, quite good at jumping but never traveled too far from the fence. We still had about an hour of sunlight before the sun went down. We both decided to canvass around the edge of the fence to see if we could see them on the other side and to get them back in if they were. We did find the goats however, but it wasn't what we expected. They were outside of the fence but the two goats were now dead, torn apart. We knew that this would be predators that did this, but what another thing we noticed and was very strange, to say the least. There were two puncture wounds on the neck of both of the goats. It looked like something had come onto the field, killed the goats and they dragged them into the woods behind the field and they just sucked all their blood. We both had no idea what this could be, as this was the first time this had ever happened to us, as at the end of the day, vampires don't exist. My dad had some trail cams back in the house and so decided that tomorrow morning he would go and put up the camera, as there was now a trail left by some sort of animal. The next morning my father got up extra early just so he could put up those trail cams. However, when he was heading to the woods through the field, he noticed a large amount of fur around a pool of blood. It seems that whatever creature was attacking the livestock had struck again. This time it was serious and this problem had to be dealt with quickly before it completely wipes out all of the livestock and even moves on to the rest of the animals on the farm. He got to the woods and put up about 5 cameras around the area. He really needed to catch whatever animal was killing our livestock. He then went back and started his daily routine with the farm until the evening when he came back for dinner. The next morning, again he got up early to go and get his cameras and see if he had caught anything on camera. However, on his way to the camera, he noticed that again one of his goats had been slaughtered. This was now beyond serious and needed to be stopped. He quickly arrived at the woods to collect his camera. Again around the area was the carcass of his goats with blood and fur all over. He quickly gathered all 5 of his cameras and as quickly as he came, he went back. As soon as he got back he could not wait to get the picture of the trail cameras. He opened them one by one and took a look at the pictures. The first 3 only caught the usual stuff, rabbits, birds, that kind of stuff. However, the 4th and 5th camera caught something we both had never seen before. We both looked at each other and I know what he was thinking. A new species maybe, we both thought. The picture the camera had caught didn't have any pictures of the whole creature but only parts. There was, however, a high creature with spikes down his back and red glowing eyes, even in the daytime. From the look of the pictures on the camera, it seemed that this beast was stalking the farm before attacking the goats. We did, however, see the goats being dragged out and using the size of the goats to compare to the beast. This is how we knew how big this beast was. My dad, now with this look of absolute hate on his face, went to the gun cabinet, unlocked it and grabbed all of his guns, his shotgun, a rifle and a handgun. He then proceeded to load all his guns. I knew what his plans were and decided that I want to be a part of this. I grabbed the rest of the guns, loaded them up and gave a nod to my father. We both wanted whatever this creature was dead. We both waited till dusk as we both knew this was the time this creature started its hunt. As soon as dusk hit, we both got onto the ATV and headed out to the spot in our ghillie suits awaiting for this beast. Now at this time, we could hear the owls, crickets and more, Because of this we knew that there was no predator lurking around. I had no idea how long it would be, but like my dad, I was determined to catch this beast. Thinking back to the night, I must have fallen asleep as I cannot remember much but waking up to a click of my father preparing his shotgun. I looked around confused and dazed, but then it hit me. There was no sound in the woods. Seems that predator was either in the area or on its way here. About 20 minutes later, I could hear like footsteps in the area. What gave it away was branches being broken under the foot of the predator. I took out my rifle and reloaded to make sure there was a round in the chamber ready to fire. We waited and about 10 minutes later, we could see the silhouette of a creature making its way through the bush. We both took aim and waited for the creature to be in our crosshairs. It's now time. We could see the creature in the crosshairs. We took aim and fired at the beast. I must admit, it was a big and mighty beast. We emptied all our clips into him. We both had our handguns, both empty. The beast was now dead and our livestock safe. We both got up and took a look at the creature. It was like nothing I had seen before. Even my father knew nothing of it either. We decided to put the creature on ice to send off for testing. All we know from the test was, this was a new creature, a hybrid of sorts, but what they couldn't figure out was what creatures it was related to. The creature now lays in the museum stuffed for all to see.
There are creatures of myth out there that you would want to stay away from. These creatures comes from the thing of nightmares and will truly haunt your dreams, having you wake up in a cold sweat. So with that in mind, here is the top 5 urban mythical creatures that will haunt your dreams. 5. The Tripacabra. Chupacabra, translated as goatsucker, is a reptile-like creature, said to have leathery or scaly greenish skin and sharp spines or quills running down its back. It is said to be approximately 3 to 4 feet high and stands and hops in a fashion similar to that of a kangaroo. The first reported attack occurred in March 1995 in Puerto Rico. 8 sheep were discovered dead, each with 3 puncture wounds in 3 chest area and completely drained of blood. So a vampire-type creature, that can sneak up behind you, without you knowing and suck all your blood out, definitely not something I would like to see in my dreams. 4. The Banshee. There are many varying descriptions of the Banshee. Sometimes she has long streaming hair and wears a grey cloak over a green dress, and her eyes are red from continual weeping. She may even be dressed in white with red hair and a ghastly complexion. Sometimes the Banshee assumes the form of some sweet-singing virgin of the family who died young, and has been given the mission by invisible powers to become the harbinger of coming doom to her mortal kindred. The Euclid Banshee is thought to be named Abel and the ruler of 25 other Banshees who would always be at her attendance. It is possible that this possible story is the source of the idea that the wailing or numerous Banshees signifies the death of a great person. When several Banshees appear at once, it indicates the death of a great or holy person. The tale sometimes recounted that the woman, though called a fairy, was a ghost, often of a specified murdered woman, or a mother who died in childbirth. So hearing the wailing of the nearby Banshee that no one else can hear is not my idea of a great night or day. 3. The Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman is traditionally depicted as a man upon his horse missing his head. Depending on the legend, the horseman is either carrying his head, or missing his head altogether, and searching for it. The legend of the Headless Horseman begins in Sleepy Hollow, New York, during the American Revolutionary War. Tradition folklore holds that the horseman was a Hessian artilleryman who was killed during the Battle of White Plains, Indiana 1776. He was decapitated by an American cannonball, and the shattered remains of his head were left on the battlefield while his comrades hastily carried his body away. In myth, the horseman is known to ride along the streets looking out for any person that may be around. There he would chop off the head of his victim, where he would then put the severed head upon his own shoulders and disappear into the night, all while looking for his next victim. I don't know about you, but I am keen on keeping my head on my shoulders. Mind having a ghostly man keeping it on his, too. The Wendigo. The Wendigo is a mythical cannibal monster or evil spirit native to the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and Great Lakes region of both the United States and Canada. The Wendigo may appear as a monster with some characteristics of a human, or as a spirit who has possessed a human being and may then become monstrous. It is historically associated with cannibalism, murder, insatiable greed, and the cultural taboos against such behaviors. In some traditions, humans who become overpowered by greed could turn into Wendigos. The myth thus served as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. Humans can also turn into Wendigos by being in contact with them for too long. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. Yikes, definitely not a creature you would want to stalk you when alone in the forests. 1. The Thunderbird. The Thunderbird's a legendary creature in certain North American indigenous peoples' history and culture. It is considered a supernatural being of power and strength. It is especially important, and frequently depicted, in the art, songs and oral histories of many Pacific Northwest coast cultures, but is also found in various forms among some peoples of the American Southwest, East Coast of the United States, Great Lakes, and Great Plains. The Thunderbird controls the upper world while the underworld is controlled by the underwater panther or great horned serpent. The Thunderbird throws lightning at the underwater creatures and creates thunder by flapping its wings. Thunderbirds in tradition are commonly depicted as having an X-shape appearance. Well, seeing the Thunderbird and the underwater creatures in a battle would be glorious, but being anywhere near the battle is not a place I would want to be. Think, all that lightning being thrown around is sure you will be struck and dead.
Item hash, SCP-028, Knowledge. Object class, Safe. Special containment procedures. No special means are needed to contain at this time, as SCP-028 has not shown any change in size, position or shape during the entire period of its containment, but access must be restricted. Currently, SCP-028 is contained on site, as SCP-028 is not transportable by any known means. SCP-028 is sealed in a 6 by 6 by 3 meter, 20 by 20 by 10 foot, concrete room with a single door, with two armed personnel stationed outside. Only authorized personnel are to be allowed exposure to SCP-028, and extreme care must be taken at all times. While SCP-028 is itself harmless, the effect can be very damaging to the unprepared. See document L028-1125. Description: SCP-028 is located in an abandoned storage yard outside a copper mine in northern Michigan. SCP-028 has no detectable physical presence of any kind, but its effect occurs in a 2.1 meter, 7 foot, cube around what is commonly held as the center of SCP-028. All forms of scanning and testing in the area of SCP-028 have shown no abnormal readings. Adding or removing objects, or attempting to remove dirt from under SCP-028 has no effect in altering the size or shape of SCP-028's area of effect, nor the onset or quality of the effect. Subjects entering SCP-028 are, within 3 to 6 seconds, struck by total and complete knowledge of a subject. This knowledge is thus far completely random in both size and usefulness, and sometimes goes unnoticed for extended periods of time. More profound knowledge generally has a stronger effect, with some cases, expunged. See document L028-1125. This effect can be experienced multiple times by exiting and re-entering SCP-028, but can result in increasingly strong migraines and dizziness after two exposures. SCP-028 came to the Foundation's attention after research into news reports of a local miner who submitted a design for a cold fusion reactor to the U.S. Patent Office. Mr. reported that it just came to me, like a bolt out of the blue. News and subjects were suppressed and contained after discovery of SCP-028, and the reactor designs implemented in the containment of SCP-1995. Subsequent testing of SCP-028 has yielded mixed results. Document L028-14, partial information retrieval log for 1/5/. Note: all knowledge is perfect, total, and eidetic. Every phone book entry for New York City in 1998. How to redesign the internal combustion engine to run on human blood, using only pre-existing parts. Note: full redesign takes 4 hours, and runs at higher efficiency than gasoline. Location of keys for a Buick LeSabre. The proper method of care for a mole rat colony. Origin and history of 12 SCP objects. Note: the main, expunged. Family history of the Blackthorn family, located in London, England. Geological structure of the Earth beneath Greenland, including several unknown caves and, expunged. Document L028-1125, log. E112, subject D1182 exposed to SCP-028. Subject began to cry and went into fetal position, showing signs of high distress. unresponsive to questioning and outside stimulus for several days. Lapsed into catatonia shortly after stating that this is not life. Subject passed into a coma and died shortly thereafter. COD was attributed to shock. E127, agent accidentally exposed to SCP-028. Agent showed signs of sudden surprise and bemusement. When questioned, agent requested a moment to gather my thoughts, please. After several seconds, agent laughed, shook his head, and removed his service pistol from its holster. Agent then shot and wounded Dr. and killed agents and before being restrained. Post-incident interrogation revealed agent had extensive knowledge of classified Foundation activities, and several SCP objects he had not been previously exposed to, including SCP-2669. Any Foundation personnel found to have entered SCP-028's area of effect are to be detained indefinitely. Document #L028-1128, Log. Experiment 189, Subject D9843 was exposed to SCP-03/1911-46. Examination of subject revealed abnormal respiratory actions. /03/1913-37. Questioning revealed subject had learned to recycle the carbon dioxide inside his body. /03/1917-21. Repeated attempts to teach skill to other D-class personnel failed. /03/241211. Subject terminated. /07/1815-03. Autopsy reveals no abnormal organ formations. /07/1818-37. Researchers notes, Dr. seriously, how the hell did he do that?
Item, SCP-010. Object Class, Safe. Special Containment Procedures. This objects comprising SCP-010 are to be kept in numbered locked boxes in a high-security facility. They are not to be worn except by test subjects. SCP-010 are only to be removed from storage for testing. Description: SCP-010 consists of 6 apparently identical cast iron collars with numbered metal tags and 1 remote control. The control is SCP-010-1. The colors are SCP-010-2 through 010-7. The collars contain intricate electric components and are powered by small 5 mm diameter, 2 mm thick 100V batteries. These batteries are rechargeable. The remote is a heavy black box resembling an old-style hand-held radio transmitter, receiver with a primitive blue-white cathode ray screen and a series of more than 100 unlabeled buttons, as well as a frequency tuner. Through trial and error, the frequencies of all 6 currently found collars have been discovered. A label in Russian is stamped into the metal along with a logo consisting of workers building a pyramid. No official Russian corporation or government agency uses this logo or matches the words stamped into the metal. Placing the collar around the neck of a person and securing it allows one to control their every movement with the remote. It is also capable of producing an adrenal response and activating or deactivating the sympathetic nervous system. The most abnormal feature of the collars is the effect they have on the body morphology. They allow the user of the remote to reconfigure the shape of the victim to an extent that is apparently only limited by the knowledge of the programming language of the remote. Addendum 010-1 History. SCP-010 was discovered in the basement of a lone man in the Midwestern United States after a local disappearance was connected to him. When police raided the man's house, they found SCP-010 as well as several dead bodies. One of the bodies was identified to be the man. The others were several other missing persons. Cause of death seemed to be mass suicide, however, there was signs of significant struggle. Addendum 010-2, Disassemble Experiment.
Test 1, SCP-010-2 taken apart piecewise, the parts labeled and several photographs taken, then reassembled. Result: after reassembly, SCP-010-2 continues to function. Test 2, SCP-010-8 constructed identically to SCP-010-2 but with closest approximations available to the unreplicable components. Results: SCP-010-8 fails to function. Test 3, unreplicable components from SCP-010-2 placed into proper locations on SCP-010-8. Results: SCP-010-2 ceases functioning with removal of components. SCP-010-8 begins functioning. Test 4, components returned to SCP-010-2. Replicable components in SCP-010-2 replaced with replicas. Results: SCP-010-2 begins functioning with return of components. Changing replicable components for replicas does not significantly reduce functionality. Replacement of a damaged transmitter decreased time from transmission to effective SCP-010-2 response to commands entered in the remote by 12%. Addendum 010-3. SCP-010 has been demonstrated to work more effectively in creating unskilled labor than any other task. Attempts at replicating SCP-010 through 010-7 using modern-day components, the device does not function. Results are that SCP-010 through 010-7 cannot be mass-produced.
When I was a young teenager back in the day, I was obsessed with urban legends. I was so obsessed I would buy magazines each week from my local corner shop. I would then cut out the pictures, stories, and make my very own scrapbook of the legends that I thought was the best. When my mates came over, they would make so much fun of me as I used to collect these stories of urban legends. I'd even go so far as to have the posters made of the ones I loved the most. My walls was full of these posters. However, one legend that stuck out to me, the one I loved to read at least several times a day, was called Humans Can Lick Too, or The Hand Licker, depending on which part of the world you lived in. I even made up my own stories of this legend. I was so impressed with the story that I made several different stories and posted them just about everywhere I could on the internet, even Reddit. However, this story is a story on how I survived a night of horror with every detail restraining to every detail I have written in my stories. It looked as if someone had become obsessed with my stories and wanted to make it a reality for me. This story goes back to the summer of 2005. My parents would take one night a week where they would have a date night. As people with children know, it can be hard to have time to yourself with children. Also, you will know how children are. If they're not pestering you for something they want, then they will be wanting your attention for playtime, story reading. Even getting children to bed takes a few hours. My parents promised each other from the day the first child was born they will take one night a week where they will go and have fun with each other. You know, go for dinner, movie, or maybe just a dance. I am the oldest at the age of 17, so I was old enough to look after myself along with my younger siblings. They usually got a babysitter, but no longer did this as I was old enough now. Besides, the money they gave me I saved up each time, thinking of buying a car one day. One week this happened, they had planned to go out for a meal, the movies, and then for a dance. They wouldn't be back until the next morning. My other siblings were staying away at a friend's house. To be honest, I was actually looking forward to having the house to myself. So those of you who had siblings will understand that you can never get any time to yourself. I had a great night planned for myself. The time for their date had arrived. Don't forget to lock all the doors and windows, my parents told me as I left through the front door. Taking the words into mind, I went through the house and started to lock all the windows and making sure the doors too were locked. Now, with all the doors and windows locked, there was, however, one window left. It would have to be in the most creepiest place. I thought to myself, oh well, better get on with it. The last window was down in the basement. I hated it. It was cold, damp, not lit very well. I grabbed a torch from the drawer, turned it on, and went very cautiously down into the basement to where the window was located. I grabbed hold of the handle of the window, but it was very stiff and would not move so easily. I pulled and pulled, but it would only move about an inch. Getting fed up of the window, I looked around the basement for anything that could help me close the window. There in the corner on the shelf I saw a small can of oil. I knew that by putting oil on the hinges, and it should loosen up if I just moved the window back and forth. I did this for what seemed like 5 minutes. In the end, the window did decide to close itself, however, it would not lock. I thought to myself that it wouldn't matter, anyone that walked past the window will think it would be locked as it was now closed. Oh, how that will come back to bite me on this night. Not thinking too much into it, I knew the basement had a deadlock bolt on the door, so I decided to lock the basement door instead, thinking that would be enough, just in case someone decided to go through the basement window. Now, with everywhere locked up, I decided that I would watch a bit of TV, have a nice dinner, and then go and browse the web for any new urban legends that I have never heard of before. Before I could do any of this, I would need to feed our dog. She was a border collie, brown and white in colour. I went to the cupboard, got out her food, and gave her a generous amount in a bowl. It seemed like I was on the web for hours browsing the urban legends of how time flies by when you're having a bit of fun. It was now dark outside. Looking at the time, it read 11 p.m. Wow, that was late, I thought to myself. It was time for bed. I turned off my computer, then went to the bathroom to get ready for bed. A nice hot shower, teeth brushed, and my PJs on. I walked into my bedroom and was delighted to see the dog laying with her head just out from under my bed. She always seemed to sleep with me. I have no idea why. Maybe she liked me more than the other family members. I started to snuggle up in my bed, put my hand down near my dog so she could lick my hand. I liked it when she does this. It makes me feel safe and also assure her that I'm here and I'm fine. I kept my hand there for a few minutes before deciding that enough was enough, and it was time to close my eyes and go to sleep. Later that night I was startled awake. I don't know how or why I was, but I was. I lay there for a few minutes listening to my surroundings, and then it hit me. I was hearing the tap drip in the bathroom, and just figured it was that awoke me. No big deal, I thought to myself, it's just the tap. I was starting to feel nervous. I put my hand back down to my dog's level so she could lick my hand. This brings me reassurance, and also I know she is there if I really need her. An hour later, I was yet again started awake. This time I was still half asleep. I sat up in my bed and looked around the room while listening. I must have left the tap running, I thought to myself. That was however strange, as I was sure that I had turned off the tap. Then I thought to myself that maybe there was a leak with the tap. Again, I snuggled up in bed and put my hand back down to my dog's level for her to lick my hand. The next time I woke up naturally with nothing startling me awake. I looked at the time. It read 6:25. Thinking that it was now light outside and I wouldn't be able to get any more sleep, I managed to pull myself out of bed. Drawing back the curtains and looking out the window, I could see my parents' car pull into the drive. Great, I thought. I can get my dad to look at the tap and fix that drip that I've been hearing all night. Being out of bed and somewhat cold, I needed to go to the loo. I put on my slippers, opened the door, and went to the room that was the bathroom. What I saw that day when I opened the door will forever haunt me to the day I die. I fell to my knees. My parents, hearing my curdling screams, came running into their house to be by my side. They asked me, "What's wrong?" I shakily raised my arm and pointed into the shower of the bathroom. There, our beautiful collie dog hung from a hook in its tail from the curtain rail. The dog was skinned with its skin in the bath. She soon to be gutted with all the contents too in the bath. On the mirror, there was a message that shook me to the core, turning me white as a ghost. It read, "Humans can lick too." The thought that someone was in my room under my bed while licking my hand turned my stomach. I couldn't take it anymore and I had to own up. I pushed past my parents and ran to the toilet and let loose. I didn't want to because of the scene in the bathroom, but I couldn't help it. My parents called the police that day. They came out, took a statement from me. They said that due to every window and door being locked, the only way they could have gotten in is through the basement window. However, what startled me the most was, when did this person break into our home? As when I closed the basement window, I also deadbolted the door leading to the basement, but I didn't quite trust leaving the window closed. My parents never left me alone again. When they went out, they made sure that I either go to my friend's house for the night. If not at my friend's house, then I will go and stay at a relative's. My parents bought the house up for sale that year. We couldn't live in the house anymore, knowing that someone was there. The house sold quite quickly, and we moved into a new house within 6 months of selling the house. Okay guys, that was the urban legend Humans Can Lick Too. If you enjoyed this video, then please do leave a like, don't forget to comment, and for all more videos, don't forget to subscribe. Until the next time, see you then. Bye bye!
Item, SCP-016. Object Class, Heater. Special Containment Procedures, SCP-016 is to remain within the confines of a 5x5x5, 5x5x5 meter room at all times, maintained at a temperature not to exceed 0 degrees Celsius. SCP-016 itself is to remain in the petri dish in the containment cube at all times unless directed otherwise by Level 4 or 05 personnel. Full documentation of experimentation with SCP-016 must be submitted before and after samples and duplicates of SCP-016 may be taken. Failure to follow these procedures will result in termination or reassignment as Class D personnel. Only authorized personnel may be permitted to obtain samples of an experiment with SCP-016 under BCL-5 containment conditions. If an outbreak does occur despite following the aforementioned procedures, directive-based personnel are to implement a code signal lockdown and containment plan. Infected personnel are to be terminated on site by security forces wearing standard mission-oriented protective posture, MOPP, anti-biological and anti-chemical equipment. Should the infection not be contained after 48 hours, the on-site nuclear device is to be detonated. Remaining personnel are not to be evacuated under any circumstances. SCP-016 has been shown to survive for up to 6 hours on hard surfaces, and up to several minutes in air. High-intensity ultraviolet light and high concentrations of orthophthalealdehyde solution have been demonstrated to be effective in disinfecting non-organic surfaces. Description: SCP-016 is a blood-borne pathogen recovered from a mine worker and data expunged who injured himself while working in a deep coal seam. Said wound became contaminated with coal dust from the mine, possibly infecting the worker with dormant spores. Over the next several days, SCP-016 proceeded to infect the remaining employees at the mining camp, as well as the CDC crisis team dispatched to deal with the epidemic. Foundation personnel then took over the investigation and terminated all affected personnel. Patient 0 was brought into captivity, and the mine shaft was collapsed by explosive device. SCP-016 has an incubation period ranging from 24 hours to 2 years, depending on the presence and number of other human hosts in the area. First symptoms resemble the common cold, and include itchy eyes, runny nose, coughing, and bodily aches. Phase 2 begins in 48 hours, and consists of a controlled form of hemorrhagic fever, as the organism causes a small amount of blood to become aspirated to the lungs, creating an aerosol effect. During Phase 3, the host crashes and bleeds out, bleeding profusely from every bodily orifice, including the nose, tear ducts, anus, skin pores, mouth, urethra, and, in case of females, vagina. Blood pressure skyrockets during the final stage. Hosts have been observed projectile vomiting blood to distances of over 5 meters. Should the host survive this near-total exsanguination, the pathogen will become dormant once more, returning to incubation phase. What distinguishes SCP-016 from other strains of hemorrhagic fever such as Ebola and Marburg is its unusual response to high stress. Should the subject undergo a high-stress situation, such as a life-threatening crisis, the organism will change its survival tactic from rapid reproduction to the rewriting of the host's DNA and stimulation of rapid cell division. Major physiological changes occur within the first 24 hours, with complete bodily reconstruction occurring within 2 weeks' time. Most hosts do not survive the process due to the heavy demands made on the body. An interesting side effect of the transformation is an increased aggressive urge. It is believed that this may be an attempt to maximize the spread of the virus in a manner similar to rabies. On another note, subjects who undergo bodily transformation no longer appear to exhibit SCP-016's hemorrhagic properties. However, subjects infected by transformed hosts will still undergo the